Welcome back. You're watching Alistair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, and thank you very much indeed for so doing. The rapid fall of the old Afghan government and the military triumph of the Taliban was quite remarkable. It's been argued that it was inevitable once Donald Trump cut an exit deal with the Taliban and his successor, President Joe Biden, bought into it. The underestimation of the military strength and effectiveness of the Taliban has also been blamed, with intelligence sources widely in the box. And the row over how well we got folk out and other allies and why so many remain, of course, continues. But in my view, the most significant part of the aftermath is the attitude of President Joe Biden to the future role of the United States to the rest of the world, in intervention, in nation building, and to alliances. In short, is he simply a classic isolationist, and does he think allies are fine, as long as they agree with him? And does it mean, as Andrew Rawnsley in The Observer suggests today, it is time perhaps for the UK to look for new friends, even, and I'll whisper it, in Europe? With me now is Lord Robin Rennick. Now, again, it's Alistair Stewart and Friends, and I'm delighted to tell you that I first met Robin in the 1990s in Washington as the United States and the UK debated the post-Velvet Revolution world order, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and attitudes towards a united Germany. They were very, very tricky times. So, Robin, great to see you. The generality first, and then we'll talk specifically about President Biden and our relationships with him. But you saw through Rhodesia, UDI, you saw through South Africa, ANC, and you and I together saw through 89, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the Velvet Revolution. How do you put Afghanistan in that pecking order?
Look, first of all, the special relationship. It is at least partly a myth. And when I was in Washington, I banned anybody in the embassy using the term special relationship because it gives the wrong impression. It gives the impression that the Americans are going to agree with us, come what may, that our interests are identical, which they very often are, but not always, and that, they will always do more or less what we want. What it is, however, is a specially close relationship, and that will endure. It's always been a roller coaster relationship. I've described, many of the ups and downs in a book. There have been a lot of highs. There have also been some serious lows. And this is one of the lows because what has happened in Afghanistan is an unmitigated fiasco. President Biden campaigned on the promise that he was going to restore the United States' reputation in the world. Now, what has happened in Afghanistan has had exactly the opposite effect.
Yes.
Every jihadist in the planet is celebrating. It's been greeted with appalled dismay by the Allies who didn't want to pull out of Afghanistan and who were barely consulted at all. It's been greeted with jubilation in Moscow and Beijing and especially in Tehran.
Let me pick one example out of that, because I discussed it on this programme last week, and you mentioned China in passing. China publicly said to the folk in Taiwan, when we come, if we come, the Americans won't be there. That's the Chinese government, the People's Republic of China, the Communist Party of China, taking Biden and Afghanistan and warning Taiwan. I mean, that's pretty profound.
Well, what has happened inevitably will be regarded, and dangerously, both in Beijing and Moscow, as a sign of weakness. Yeah. And, in the same breath, as he just said that America was no longer prepared to be the world's policeman, which is anything but new, Obama said absolutely the same and, didn't intervene or didn't do anything to help in Syria. That was just a handoff to the Europeans who, of course, couldn't deal with it. They're bound to be worried. I mean, Israel, Taiwan, there are a whole raft of African countries we are helping with the Americans and the French to fight off jihadists. These are small, fragile states. They need help to do that. I mean, and Biden is not going to be viewed through the same eyes by any Western leader. It isn't only here that there was, a pretty appalled reaction. In France, the same. Germany also had troops in Afghanistan. They didn't want to leave any more than we did. So the damage is considerable in terms of reputation.
And the stage for much of that, well, a twin stage, if you will, because there was G7 with our Prime Minister in the chair, basically witnessing in full public gaze President Joe Biden saying no. And then there's NATO, you mentioned France in passing there, as well, basically saying to Biden, give us a little longer to get our people and our friends out and what have you. And again, in full public gaze, Biden going no. So it's not only the special relationship, which we must no longer utter as a phrase, I completely accept that, that's in the doc.
Yeah.
It's also, to a degree, G7, economically vital, and NATO, defence vitality.
Yes, well, this was a solo performance by the American president. Now, if it had worked out well, I mean, everybody would be saying, well, OK. It has worked out about as badly as it possibly could have worked out. Even if you think that we should have got out, or the US should have got out of Afghanistan, it was the worst possible way of doing it. For a start, you should never do something at the height of the fighting season in Afghanistan, which is the summer. In the winter, half the Taliban are back in Pakistan, hiding in caves, to avoiding being bombed. So mistake number one, timing. Catastrophic mistake number two was abandoning the Bagram air base in your main base in the middle of the night without telling your Afghan allies you were doing so. That had a completely demoralizing effect on the Afghan special forces who were actually fighting the Taliban. At that point, they were running out of, they weren't getting paid, they were running out of ammunition, and they relied critically on US air support.
Yeah.
All suddenly withdrawn. So, apart from the forces there, which were very small, we no longer had any combat forces in Afghanistan, nor did the Americans. It was all logistics, training, air support. But there were also 15,000 contractors, Western contractors, helping the Afghan Air Force to fly, helping with all logistic issues, who then obviously all had to leave as well. Now, the results we've seen. Obviously, a lot of people have been got out, but not nearly as many as those who remain. And the Taliban are not nice guys. They have got where they are through terror. That is the method they have used to gain territory across Afghanistan. And they will hunt down some of those, quite a lot of those, who've been left behind.
It's a delicate question, and I've always on this programme, I accept people who wish to play with a flat bat if they do occasionally, because it involves people you know, and it involves a great office of state that you once worked in. But is there any explanation or any excuse for the personal details of people like translators and people who worked with Her Majesty's government and their forces in Afghanistan, those details being left littered across the floor of one of Her Majesty's embassies?
No, there's no excuse whatever. And, whoever was responsible for that, I hope there will be a proper inquiry, because it is totally unforgivable. When you're evacuating an embassy, everything is supposed to be burned, and it's supposed to be burned before you leave. Now, that didn't happen in this case. That's really bad. But the performance of our forces in getting people out was absolutely admirable. They couldn't have done better, in my opinion. In the circumstances they were in, they couldn't possibly have done better than they did. And by the way, we'll now be hearing, all these people died in vain. 400 plus British soldiers died in vain. Not true. For the last 20 years, there has been no terrorist attack mounted from Afghanistan, thanks to them. And, the Americans are now hoping that the Taliban will stick to terrorizing one country only, their own, and not export terrorism. And it's possible that they will actually not any longer export terrorism because of what we did to them militarily when they did export terrorism.
So the threat that Johnson's made it, and Biden even has implied it, that if you go back to your old ways, which were, and you've just cited the two victories, were girls going to school, women having greater rights, and also the fact that al-Qaeda weren't taking down other great monuments around the world. You take seriously that threat. If you go down those bad ways again, we will be back.
Well, we will certainly be back with air power in a major way, for sure.
Yeah.
But let's face it. A result of Biden's policy has been the abandonment of a lot of allies of ours in Afghanistan and of the entire female population of Afghanistan. So it's really going to dent his image very seriously as a nice guy. I knew him well. Yeah. He is a nice guy, normally. He absolutely is, but not in this case. And, there have been all sorts of tortured explanations of, how it was done, but, no vestige of apology. And even, his loyal supporters in the US are cringing and finding it very difficult to support this. Yeah. So it will affect his standing with other world leaders, unfortunately. Will we get over it? Of course we will. We have to get over it. We are by far the biggest investors in the United States, $550 billion of investment. They are by far the biggest investors in Britain. And since we have got duty-free access to the rest of the EU, that will continue because they find it so much easier to do business here than they do in France or even Germany. That's critically important for us.
Final question. Tom Tugendhat, Tory MP, chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, who has also done time in Afghanistan, as it were,
yes,
in uniform, has said from quite early on this is the worst foreign policy crisis for the United Kingdom since Suez. And Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, told him face-to-face when he was grilled before that Select Committee that Tugendhat was just wrong. It wasn't that at all. What's Robin Rennick's view?
Well, it is a serious crisis, but we have to move on. Like it or not, we have to move on. I mean, Johnson and Biden now have to concentrate on the climate change conference culminating in Scotland in November. And, they are convergent on those issues. And Biden will need Johnson's support to, help try and get people ducks in a row for that. Unfortunately, as you know, the Americans themselves acknowledge that despite the enormous pledges we've made, which are going to increase the costs to every household in Britain for all sorts of things, unless the Chinese and Indians start doing the same, there will be no effect on global warming. Sure. So somebody's got to start addressing that problem. The further problem is that, the projections are for an extra 1 billion people in Africa within 35 years. You can't, parce Greta, parce Extinction Rebellion, unless you deal with the Chinese, the Indians, and population increase in Africa, we are wasting our time. Now, we still should cut our own emissions.
It takes people of a certain age and experience to be able to say "Pace Greta," meaning despite Greta Thunberg. Robin, really great to see you again.